A podcast, KBC.com, Apple iTunes, YouTube, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks wrapping up a tumultuous April that saw stocks whipsawed by the president's tariffs policies and recent stance on negotiations. The Dow down 3% for the month. Stocks climbing out of the session lows today after a social media outlet in China affiliated with the state-run channel posting that the U.S. had reached out to China seeking to negotiate on tariffs. Earlier today, we got an update on economic growth. The gross domestic product showing the U.S. economy contracted at an annual rate of 0.3% in the first quarter, according to an advanced estimate released by the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. The decrease primarily reflects an increase in imports as the president's tariff push rattled confidence and businesses rushed to increase inventory. Economists, by the way, expected a drop in growth of 0.1%. Looks like in the fourth quarter of last year, the economy grew by a rate of 2.4%. Now, prior to that report, an ADP readout on the private payroll growth in the month of April showed a pullback in hiring amid what the report called a difficult environment defined by unease among businesses. We got the latest reading today on the Fed's preferred inflation gauge showing prices easing last month. Investors bracing for an uptick in pricing pressures following the implementation of President Trump's tariff agenda. The Dow coming in for a closing gain today of 142 points, settling at 40,669. The S&P 500 moving up 8 at 5,569. The Nasdaq, though, giving back 15 points today to 17,446. Looks like the VIX index popped a bit today, up just about 2%. The price of gold has seen a wild ride last month, hitting record highs above 3,500, pulling back today by about $32, back to 3,287.30. Silver right now hovering at $32.84 an ounce. Crude oil futures cracking below 60 today, right now hovering at $58.37 a barrel. Tech names in focus today after the closing bell. Microsoft announced better than expected earnings on strong cloud bookings, and Meta, parent company of Facebook, also posted better than expected results. We'll be taking a closer look at that here in just a moment. Today, NVIDIA's chief executive officer thanked President Trump for his growth and industry-oriented policies during the Invest in America event at the White House. A new look at the California property tax system underway, and taxpayer advocates telling the state to prevent poverty and homelessness by protecting Prop 13. Also, some homeowners in the fire-ravaged areas of Malibu and the Palisades are outraged over property tax bills they're getting with just ashes on their property at this point. I'll discuss all that with Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, which is heard Tuesday nights right here on 790 KBC and our great sister station in the Bay Area, KSFO. On the Middle East this afternoon, Dan RAVIV will be joining me, former network news correspondent, Middle East expert, and author of numerous books on the Israeli intelligence service. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, tech, earnings out this afternoon, and the whole works. Joining us live now is Daniel Ives, Managing Director and Global Head of Technology Research at Wedbush Securities. Dan, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Great to be here.
Take it from the top and give us the breaking news on the earnings that came out this afternoon after the closing bell.
I mean, look, me and you have talked about it for the last month. I mean, since tariffs, the big worry was, is big tech pulling back? Is CapEx pulling back? Is cloud spending pulling back? And we've talked about tech holding up strong. Tonight, an Aaron Judge-like performance. Microsoft, Meta. I mean, this is going to be something that really drives the market over the coming weeks and months in terms of the tech trade, hugely bullish quarters.
All right, what do you like about Meta here, and what do you like about Microsoft based on what we got this afternoon?
There's really nothing not to like. I mean, look, if you look at Meta, like digital advertising, robust. You're seeing CapEx, they're doubling down. The reason that that's so important is CapEx for big tech is driving the AI revolution. And, I mean, you're seeing strong sub growth. I mean, everything, even from a margin perspective, I mean, Meta, probably one of their best quarters, I think even in the last, call it 6 to 8 quarters. When you look at Microsoft, best barometer for cloud spend. I mean, massive acceleration in terms of what we're seeing for cloud. And it shows companies are not they're not buckling. They're spending in this area.
All right, big news this afternoon. Some of the networks took it live today when the head of NVIDIA spoke at the White House with President Trump today at that big gathering, big business gathering there at the White House. Any big news that you picked up on what the NVIDIA Chief Executive Officer Jensen Huang had to say this afternoon?
I mean, look, I think he's saying pretty on brand. I mean, I don't think there was too much surprise what he was saying. But I did look. If you look earlier in the day, he was talking about how China is not as far behind as the U.S. when it comes to AI, and that's a little shot across the bow because it comes down to when you think about the tariffs and everything happening here. The biggest worry is you basically cut big tech off at their knees. Where they get the chips, you get them from China. And it feels like you're seeing a softening from the administration, and I think that's important. And look, the investment in America, then that's good, but the reality is you can't have a sell America trade happening, and that's really what's been happening in the market.
All right, what about NVIDIA stock, which took a hit this month, cracking below 100 for a while? Looks like it's hovering at around 108 and change here at the moment. What do you see ahead for NVIDIA?
I mean, look at the results we got from Microsoft and Meta. I mean, that's kind of the exclamation point. There's only one chip fueling the AI revolution. It's NVIDIA. So despite China tariffs and everything that we're seeing there, that continues to be, in our view, top tech pick here.
What a month of April. Can you reflect on this month, the volatility and the hits that were taken this month in the tech space, and, of course, the correction and then out of correction and all the volatile moves we've seen here, and it's hard to believe tomorrow's May 1st already.
I know. May couldn't come quick enough, right? Look, I mean, a roller coaster April, but you're ending it a lot better than it started. And I think part of that is administration backing off. They need to back off, and that's something that we're seeing, and the market likes it, and the results are strong.
All right, there's the old Wall Street adage, sell in May and go away. What do you see ahead for the month of May here?
I get the adage, but I think this time it's different because you're going to see a catch-up trade in tech, I think, for the next 4 to 6 weeks because of the results that we're seeing. And look, Apple tomorrow, it's going to be dicey, right, just given lack of guidance because of tariffs. But I think you're going to see a tech catch-up trade here, and investors basically, almost confirming the view that the administration is going to have to soften. They're going to have to get deals on the table, and they're going to have to de-escalate.
Speaking of deals, the Ukraine deal with the U.S. On rare earth metals getting a lot of attention. The top story this hour on the major networks, and it looks like there are some rare earth stocks, right? Are you keeping an eye on those? And it looks like they might be getting some more attention tomorrow.
Yeah, they'll definitely be getting more attention. Look, and then also it speaks to, ultimately, we could talk about tech, but where's everything made? It's made from raw materials. Where's that raw materials? It's in China. So as you see more and more what we're seeing in Ukraine and some others, it definitely takes more, at least over time, reliance on China, and it's something investors want to see as a broader trend. Also, you want to see, you ultimately want to see peace when it comes to Russia, Ukraine. I mean, I think that's ultimately another thing relative to the market that the market's waiting.
On there live with Daniel Ives at Wedbush, their top tech analyst. And I know you had a very, very busy day today, Dan, so let me try to squeeze in a few more questions before I know you have to jump on to continue your great work there. But what about what's happening with China and AI and any stocks related to Chinese AI? We have all these the so-called Google of China, the so-called Tesla of China, and is there an equivalent? Is there a NVIDIA of China?
I mean, Alibaba, that continues to be the name that we like. In terms of Alibaba, in terms of in China, that's the name that we're really focused on. Yeah, obviously, I have some others like BYD, called the Tesla of China. But look, I'm not a believer that it has to be U.S. or China. I do believe China tech is going to continue to actually perform strong. But look, it just comes down to like you need to get a deal done, whether it's India or South Korea or whatever it may be from the White House. Then you got to de-escalate on the China side.
All right, what do you see happening here as far as trade is concerned? With the focus now, a lot of attention here on the West Coast ports, ports of L.A. and Long Beach, and not as much activity as we heard from the port director of Los Angeles, Gene Soroka, this week. What do you see happening here, and the impact here on the markets and the economy?
It's significant. Everything we're tracking from a ship perspective down anywhere from 30 to 45% in terms of coming from China to the U.S., whether it's West Coast or, or across the country. That's going to be price increases. It's going to be inventory issues. I think a lot of that you'll start to see probably middle of May, late May. But it speaks to our point. You can't keep it at this pace in terms of the tariffs. There's only one person that's paying the tariff. It's a U.S. consumer. And I think, look, and that's, Frank, I think more and more, there's pressure for the White House. Come back, backtrack. That's what the market's betting on.
All right, the Fed's watching that inflation reading and also the jobs report, the big enchilada of monthly economic reports coming out this Friday. Are we expecting any surprises here on Friday? And what's your gut feeling on the recession question that's being raised this week?
Yeah, look, the GDP number was a little funky, and I'm sure for anyone, a lot of moving parts. Even though it was a negative GDP, if you actually look at it, there were good parts of it. So I wouldn't get so caught up with a negative GDP and then another negative GDP and you have a recession. Look, you are having softer data. That's the reality, right? You're probably going to have a soft job number too. Fed's not going to cut, just given our view. You have the biggest inflationary policy in 100 years with tariffs. So Fed's not going to cut. They're going to see how this plays out, and I think that's the right strategy.
All right. At this point, let me ask you the big question we ask on this program here. Any specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table?
In software. In other words, software in tech, that continues to be the safety blanket trade. I think you saw with the hyperscalers tonight. I think you want to own tech in this market. You're going to have a tech catch-up trade. And that, to me, that's the way to play this market. You don't get caught up in the fears. You got to see through it.
Daniel Ives, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon. That's Daniel Ives, Managing Director and Global Head of Technology Research at Wedbush Securities, based right here in Southern California. Live with us here on Mottek On Money on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Can you believe it? April, now in the history books, the volatile month of April. Wrapped up today with a mixed finish. The Dow closing higher by 142 points at 40,669. The S&P 500 up 8 at 5,569. And the NASDAQ slipping 15 to 17,446. A couple of big readings on the economy came out today. The ADP report, that's the private payroll jobs report, slowing to 62,000 in the month of April. That came in below analyst expectations. Leisure and hospitality posting the biggest gain in the latest survey, adding 27,000 jobs, according to ADP. Others that showed increases include trade, transportation, and utilities. Financial activities and construction also got a boost in hiring. Private sector payrolls rose by just about 62,000 for the month, the smallest gain since July of 2024. And as CNBC notes, amid heightened uncertainty over the degrees of the tariffs and the impact they will have on hiring plans and broader economic conditions. Companies slowed hiring sharply in April as they braced against potential impacts from the president's tariffs against other trading partners, according to the ADP survey. We also got the latest update on the economy, economic growth for the month or the last quarter. The economy shrank in the first quarter, I should say, but the underlying report showed trends under the hood that should dampen recession fears, according to Barron's. According to Ryan Sweet, chief economist at Oxford Economics, he said real GDP slipped in the first quarter, and while a decline during an expansion is unusual, it's not unheard of, and the economy is not in a recession, according to his assessment. As this debate continues, whether we're already in a recession or recession's on the horizon, very much being discussed this week. One of the key areas of optimism is the fact that consumer spending largely is held up, posting a gain of 1.8% in the first quarter, despite the dismal readings on confidence in recent weeks and months, showing that there's still little correlation between how Americans feel and how they shop and spend. We did see the VIX index bounce all over the place for the month of April, today up 2%. The price of gold hitting record highs over the past month, above $3,500 an ounce for the first time, slipping right now down about $32 to $3,287.30 an ounce. Silver got a pop this month as well, right now hovering just below $33 an ounce, $32.84 here at last check. The price of oil moving sharply lower today on concerns about the economy. Oil back below $60 a barrel today at $58.37 a barrel here at the moment. After the closing bell, as we just discussed with Daniel Ives at Wedbush, we did get some earnings news from a couple of the tech giants, including Meta, Facebook parent company, delivering an earnings beat, sending its stock higher in after-hours trading.
It's part sports.
We have football on the brain.
Part pop culture.
Dennis Leary. True or false? You refuse to wear a glove with Mickey Mantle's signature on it for the movie The Sandlot.
The Red Sox blood, the Bruins blood, they run deep.
Add in the best celebrity interviews.
Robert De Niro here on The Rich Eisen Show. How are you, sir?
Just got over a 24-hour virus.
The antidote is to appear on The Rich Eisen Show.
There you go. I would just have done it earlier.
And you've got the Rich Eisen Show podcast.
There is a medicinal quality to appearing on this program.
Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Meta shares today had dropped more than $5 at $5.49. And Microsoft stock also higher in after-hours trading, showing booming cloud growth. Microsoft reported earnings for its fiscal third quarter after the closing bell this afternoon. Microsoft stock closed up $1.22 today at $3.95 and change. Looks like we'll be getting Apple's earnings tomorrow, so we'll be, of course, following that very, very closely. Apple stock today up $1.29 at $212.50. Apple usually reports its earnings about 30 minutes after the closing bell, and that's what we're expecting tomorrow afternoon. Taking a look at the cryptos now, we see Bitcoin hovering at 94,215, Ethereum at 1,795 after seeing a rough month of April, and Doge at the moment at 17 cents. Looks like the rare earth stocks will be in focus first thing in the morning. On the top story today, that the U.S. and Ukraine have worked out a deal on rare earth minerals, and that deal looks like it's been signed, sealed, and delivered now. Some of those companies that will be in focus tomorrow include Ucore Rare Metals, MP Materials Corp., Neo Performance Materials, Energy Fuels, and Li-Cycle Holdings. Those are some of the rare earth metals companies that are expected to be in focus first thing tomorrow morning. Of course, Apple will be in focus as well, and we'll be getting that earnings report out tomorrow afternoon. Looks like they'll be reporting their earnings, and a lot of write-ups today on what might be expected there. The iPhone maker Apple will report earnings after the bell tomorrow. And, of course, that one is also sensitive to the tariff news. The stock has declined about 16% this year so far due to rising geopolitical tensions and tariff uncertainties. Wall Street analysts expect Apple to post earnings of $1.61 per share, up 5% from a year ago. Revenues are expected to increase about 4% from a year ago to $94.19 billion, according to data from TipRank's forecasts. And now let's get the latest news for you here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Looks like there's a big discussion going on in Sacramento, a discussion of California's property tax system as it relates to poverty. The State Board of Equalization holding a big informational hearing titled The Importance of California's Property Tax System in Addressing the Disproportional Impact of Poverty, reflected in income inequality, geographic disparities, and financial outcomes for Californians. Taxpayer advocates telling the state to prevent property poverty and homelessness protect Proposition 13 and people's properties. Also, some homeowners in the fire-ravaged areas of Malibu and the Palisades are expressing outrage now over property tax bills they're getting with just ashes on their property. Let's bring in Susan Shelley now, columnist for the Southern California News Group, which includes the LA Daily News, host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard Tuesday nights here on 790 KBC, as well as our great sister station in the Bay Area, KSFO. Susan Shelley, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank. Great to be with you.
Wonderful to have you with us. It's been a while since we've chatted behind a live microphone, so tell us what we need to know about what's happening in Sacramento and that big hearing up there.
Well, this is very concerning. You know, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association watches the horizon for a tax on Proposition 13, and this appears to be one of them, starting the path over the horizon toward California. What they're doing is they're trying to say that poverty in California is caused by property tax breaks, which they consider to be improper because everyone should just pay everything they have to the government. That's essentially what they're doing. So the informational hearing held by the Board of Equalization, which is an agency that oversees the county tax assessors, the informational hearing was aimed at listening to people who think that there should be a split property tax roll or some other system that raises property taxes in California. So a split roll means that one category of property would be taxed under different rules than a different category. Usually they're talking about property that is commercial, apartment buildings, strip malls, office buildings. Those would be taxed, well, under the proposal that was put forward in 2020, they would be reassessed to market value every year, and the property taxes would skyrocket to the point where businesses had to leave the state, which they're doing anyway. So it would only accelerate that. But this hearing was particularly troubling because there was a law professor there who was actually saying that people should be taxed on their property based on their income. And if they have a lot of income, but their property taxes are perceived as not high enough, they should pay something more in income tax to compensate for the fact that Proposition 13 is controlling their property taxes, which is quite an alarming wealth tax kind of proposal. And we are certainly going to be watching to see if anybody tries to advance that.
Out of the pages of Marxism, right? And also they're talking about utility bills based on income, too. What's going on up there?
Well, what's going on with utility bills is the green agenda is pushing the costs up, and everything is being passed through to the ratepayer, from the mandate to use solar and wind energy to the various other green mandates that exist for utilities. Everything that they're doing is causing the costs to go up, and the utilities pass that straight through to the ratepayers. And people are really feeling it. They're getting these utility bills that they cannot pay. And among the investor-owned utilities, Southern California Edison, PG&E, and San Diego Gas and Electric, 20% of their customers are behind on their bills. 20%. And you have a significant problem with a lot of utilities trying to put their charges on property tax bills now. This just happened in the city of Upland, where they want like trash fees and other types of utility bills, which are all going up because of green mandates. They want those on the property tax bill. Why? Because it's easier to collect. If you don't pay your property tax bill, the county sells your property for you. So what's going on here is that the utilities are finding their customers can't pay the bills, but the utilities need to collect the money, and so they want to put it on the property tax bill, so people will be forced at the threat of losing their property to pay these charges. And it's all for these green mandates, such as converting to electric vehicles, things that don't really help the environment at all.
Well, I'm glad I mentioned that, and certainly the thinking there in Sacramento, with what you described, seems to be a page out of Marxism, and this perhaps another example of that as well. Now, if Prop 13 did not exist, what would poverty and homelessness look like here in California?
Well, before Prop 13, market value was the basis for the assessment. So the statewide average tax rate before Prop 13 cut it down to 1%. The average tax rate was 2.67% based on the market value every year. So imagine don't do this if you're driving because you'll wreck the car, but imagine paying 2.67% of the market value of your house every year as a condition of keeping it, because that's what property taxes would be if Prop 13 had never passed.
On there live with Susan Shelley, great taxpayer advocate, also columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard here on 790 KABC. Well, what about the property tax bills people in the fire-ravaged areas are getting on social media? People are showing those bills and getting outraged over enormous bills with basically nothing left on the property. Susan Shelley, have you had a chance to take a look at that?
I did take a look at that, and one in particular, it looks to me like it's eligible for a decline in value reassessment, because the tax bill that was posted, this is beachfront property in Malibu. It sold in 2022 for $40 million. So the tax assessment under Prop 13 is based on the sale price, and then it can go up every year with inflation. But in this case, it's gone down. So according to Redfin, it's worth between $18 million and $22 million, which means that it's eligible for a decline in value reassessment. So all the owner has to do is contact the assessor's office and fill out that form to request it. And then the assessment will drop from the $40 million level down to $18 million, which would cut the property tax bill in half. One warning, though, this is for anyone in this situation. If your assessed value is above the current market value, you can apply for a decline in value reassessment. But when the value goes up again, then the assessor can restore the previous assessment in one jump. So that can be kind of shocking when that happens. But it can't go up under any circumstances to more than it would have been under Prop 13 if the decline had never happened. So you still have the protection of Prop 13.
Very interesting. So in that neighborhood, even basically a lot with just ashes on it, you still have to pay taxes on an assessed value of about $18 million. Is that what you just said?
Well, that particular house did not burn to the ground. That was still standing. The one next to it was burned to the ground. That one also would need a decline in value reassessment to reflect the fact that it's burned out. What the bill showed that was posted on social media, what that showed was the so-called misfortune and calamity reassessment. And what the assessor did was apply that through a formula, I believe, to all the properties in the area, maybe in the whole zip code, because with the roads closed, with the construction, with the damage, all the properties have had a decline in value. But rather than go through them one at a time, I think they did an automated reduction. And the bill that was posted online showed that automatic reduction, which is much smaller than what would be applied for the decline in value.
Wow, but certainly those property values, even for vacant lots, still astronomical, and people are complaining that they have to pay property taxes on a piece of property that's not habitable, and then of course still have to find a place to live following this catastrophe. There, are you hearing more stories like this and anything else that's come out of this disaster area?
Bravo TV star Lala Kent holds nothing back.
There's been so many times where I'm like, I apologize that I said that, but that wasn't meant for you to hear.
Feel you there.
How fun would it be to bring in some Bravo celebrities and make our own bracket?
Iconic.
All right, I'll take Dorinda, you take Sonia.
Sonia is who I wish I could be.
You and me both. I cannot be someone in the program. What's PTO?
Pay time off. See?
Oh.
You've never had a real job.
Give them Lala.
It is nothing but honesty.
You guys know.
Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Well, of course, it's a terrible situation, and so many people underinsured. The insurance crisis in California is another story entirely, especially in fire-prone areas. So that's a big problem, because if people lost everything and they have no insurance, then they're in real trouble. But the land itself still has value, even though at this moment the value is less. The land eventually will recover its value. You know, although certainly the city and the county of Los Angeles are doing what they can to make sure that takes as long as possible, but eventually that land will recover. And under state law, people have to pay property taxes on the value of the land that they own. However, the state law could change, and I believe that L.A. County Assessor Jeffrey Prang has been working with some of the lawmakers in Sacramento to see if he can accelerate some of those changes to help people in this terrible situation.
Well, thanks for mentioning that. We'll extend an invite to Assessor Prang to come back on this program to discuss that further. In the meantime, thanks for taking us over the horizon Susan Shelley on taxes here in California. You do such a great job and such a terrific taxpayer advocate here in California, along with your colleagues there at the Howard Jarvis Foundation, the Howard Jarvis Tax Foundation. Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis Radio Show, which is heard on Tuesday nights right here on your favorite station, 790 KABC, as well as our great sister station in the Bay Area, KSFO. Susan, thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
And out to the freeways we go now, 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Firestorms in Israel today. A national emergency has been declared there as strong winds and high temperatures have fueled wildfires outside of Jerusalem. Looks like some of the commemorations of Israel's 77th anniversary have now been canceled because of the fires there. Joining us live now, Jan RAVIV, Middle East expert, former network news correspondent, author of numerous books on the Israeli intelligence service. Jan RAVIV, thank you very much for coming to the line. And what is the latest news there?
Always a pleasure, Frank. Well, in Israel, definitely a mixed picture. The Gaza war is not over. Hamas, responsible for the October 7th massacres and kidnappings, now a year and a half ago, not yet defeated, and 59 hostages still being held by Hamas. So a lot of Israelis are frustrated, even on the 77th birthday of their country. On top of all the pressures and the war in Gaza, there's that massive wildfire in central Israel, not far from Jerusalem. The air is thick with ash and smoke. I've spoken with a lot of people who live both in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Traffic is snarled. It is the biggest wildfire Israel has ever suffered. So as you said, most celebrations have been canceled, and that tells you something about the mood, Frank.
That is very, very serious. Any idea what caused this wildfire? And I have never heard of a situation like that there.
Well, there has been very hot, dry weather, but you know very well in Southern California, there's the danger that any spark, any fire could get out of control, and authorities are investigating suspicion of arson, whether it might be Palestinians protesting Israel or small, limited cases. The investigation goes on, but right now it's an emergency with airplanes coming from other countries, from Cyprus, Greece, Italy, in order to help Israel by dumping, as you know, fire retardant on the flames.
On there live with Middle East expert Jan RAVIV. In the meantime, Jan RAVIV, while we have you here, the U.S. Negotiating with Iran about the nuclear program. What is the very latest on that?
Well, the talks are continuing. A fourth round is scheduled for this Saturday in Rome. The chief American negotiator is President Trump's trusted friend, Steve Witkoff. He also negotiates for the hostages held in Gaza. He's been trying to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. So Witkoff has a lot of portfolios, but he does have some experts now on his team when it comes to the Iran nuclear program. Washington is not giving a lot of information, but Iran's foreign minister says the talks are serious and detailed. Iran wants to keep the ability to enrich uranium, claiming it's for peaceful purposes. The U.S. apparently is demanding that Iran give up all of its uranium enrichment equipment. And Israel, by the way, counting on the U.S. and President Trump to take a tough line on Iran, demands that all of Iran's nuclear capabilities be dismantled.
There were some reports that there was talk that they would allow Iran to continue a so-called civilian nuclear program. Is that still on the table at all?
Yeah, leave it to you to notice that, Frank. Almost all international diplomats in Washington, where I am, this is a big subject. Is Steve Witkoff, Trump's friend, up to the job? Because he gave public indications in both directions. One is that Iran could still do low-level uranium enrichment, and there would be international supervision and checking. But frankly, people who don't trust Iran at all said, no, you have to make Iran give up everything. And Steve Witkoff put out a tweet, that seemed to indicate that. So we have a little bit of confusion, and skeptics are wondering if President Trump, because he wants to have a peaceful outcome, frankly, he'd like to win a Nobel Peace Prize. That's well known. He hasn't hidden that. And President Trump may go for a deal, but will it be any different and better than the deal that Obama made 10 years ago, the one that President Trump tore up in 2018? Still a lot of questions. I can tell you Israel is watching very carefully and is ready to attack Iran's nuclear sites, but Israel does feel it would need U.S. support for that, Frank.
On the air live with Dan RAVIV, Middle East expert. And Dan, also host now of a podcast called The Mossad Files. Congratulations on your excellent podcast focusing on the Israeli intelligence service, where there was a change at the top there, by the way. What do we need to know about that briefly?
Yeah, it tells us something about Prime Minister Netanyahu and when he is firmly in power. He has to call an election by October of next year. He had a real falling out with the powerful head of the domestic security agency called Shin Bet. This man, Ronen Bar, well, he and the Prime Minister had a total falling out. Netanyahu tried to fire Mr. Bar. Bar went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gave him an order keeping him in office. What a mess. Rival depositions were filed. Bar has agreed to leave in mid-June. I would say that Netanyahu's image a little bit dented, but he does seem to have won this little battle.
And the other big news, you have a new book, Dan RAVIV. Tell us about that.
Thank you. It's called The Quest for Significance. And I always think that listeners to Mottek On Money might really think about this. There's more to life than money. And so I got together with an expert on human motivation, Professor Ari Kruglansky, and together we wrote The Quest for Significance, saying that every human being in some way wants to make his or her life significant. It doesn't have to be money. It could be public service. It could be helping your family. It could be getting along with people. But everybody wants to excel and leave a mark in one way or another. And so we investigate that. We analyze the trends throughout a lifetime and give some advice. So I think that, Mottek On Money is good for money, but the quest for significance, we're suggesting other ways in which you can feel good about yourself.
That is really wonderful, Dan. Well, thank you very much. We wish you tremendous success with the new book, and hopefully have a chance to talk to you more about that. Appreciate it. And thanks for doing a thorough job on all things Middle East and Israel. Dan RAVIV, former network news correspondent, author of numerous books on the Israeli intelligence service's latest book on something else, The Quest for Significance. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here. Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
Bravo TV star Lala Kent holds nothing back.
There's been so many times where I'm like, I apologize that I said that, but that wasn't meant for you to hear.
Feel you there.
How fun would it be to bring in some Bravo celebrities and make our own bracket?
Iconic.
All right, I'll take Dorinda, you take Sonia.
Sonia is who I wish I could be. You and me both.
I cannot be someone in the program. What's PTO?
Pay time off. See? You've never had a real job.
Give them Lala.
It is nothing but honesty.
You guys know.
Follow and listen on your favorite platform.